I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these posts. But here I am, sitting in my car, staring at my hands, trying to process the absolute dumpster fire that my life has become. This is the story of how I found out my wife was cheating on me with a janitor at Walmart. Let's rewind a bit. I've been married to Lisa for 6 years. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were solid. We had our routines. Wake up, coffee together, work, dinner, Netflix, sleep, rinse and repeat. It wasn't thrilling, but it was stable, and I loved her. At least, I thought she loved me too. Lisa had been working at Walmart for about a year. It was supposed to be temporary, a way to bring in some extra cash while she figured out her next career move. I never questioned it. She seemed happy enough, and it gave her something to do during the day while I was at my job. But then, things started to feel off. She started staying late more often, claiming she had to cover for someone. She'd come home exhausted, but also energized in a weird way, like she was glowing. At first, I chalked it up to her just feeling good about being productive. But then she started showering the moment she got home. Every single time. Red flag number 1. Then she got weird about her phone. She'd angle it away from me when she texted, always kept it on silent. And this was the big one. She stopped leaving it on the nightstand when we slept. Instead, she started bringing it to the bathroom when she showered. Red flag number 2. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe she was planning a surprise for me. Maybe she was stressed and needed space. Maybe I was overthinking it. Until the sock incident. One night, I was doing laundry and found a sock in our hamper that wasn't mine. Or hers. It was a cheap Walmart brand sock, gray, with a little faded logo on the side. The kind of sock someone on their feet all day might wear. I laughed it off at first. Lisa, did you accidentally bring home someone's sock from work? She froze for half a second before forcing a laugh. Oh, probably. I must have picked it up in the break room. That was the moment I knew. You see, Lisa was terrible at lying. When she was nervous, she'd do this thing where she scratched her wrist. And as soon as I asked about the sock, she started scratching. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited until she was asleep and checked her phone. I know. Invasion of privacy, trust issues, whatever. But I had to know. And oh boy, did I find out. There were texts. Hundreds of them. And not just texts, photos, videos, voice notes. Stuff I can't unsee. Stuff I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And the worst part? They weren't from some mysterious lover. They were from Gary. Who's Gary, you ask? Gary was the janitor at her Walmart. A guy in his late 40s, thinning hair, potbelly, always smelled like bleach and cigarette smoke. I had met him once when I picked Lisa up from work. He was that guy, the one who always made inappropriate jokes but somehow got away with it. And my wife? She was texting him things like, I can't wait to see you again, and last night was amazing. Last night. As in, a night I thought she was working late. My stomach dropped. My hands shook. I kept scrolling, each message worse than the last. Apparently, they had been meeting in the storage room. That's right. My wife was hooking up with a janitor in the back of a Walmart, probably next to a pallet of discounted dog food. I felt physically ill. I didn't confront her right away. I needed proof. So the next day, I called in sick, parked outside the Walmart, and waited. And guess what? She never even went inside. She walked around the side of the building, met up with Gary near the loading dock, and disappeared behind a dumpster. A freaking dumpster. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I took out my phone, filmed the whole thing, then drove home and packed a bag. When Lisa came home that night, she acted completely normal. Smiled, kissed me, asked if I wanted to order takeout. I handed her my phone. Her face went white. You followed me, she whispered. No, I said calmly. I followed the smell of garbage. She started crying, saying it was a mistake, that she didn't know why she did it, that it didn't mean anything. I just laughed. I told her to pack a bag and leave. She tried to beg, but I was done. The moment Lisa left the house, the weight of everything crashed down on me. I sat on the couch, staring at the door, half expecting her to walk back in and tell me it was all just a bad dream. But she didn't. And it wasn't. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever before. 6 years of marriage, gone in an instant. My mind kept replaying the image of her disappearing behind the Walmart dumpster with Gary, the janitor. I wanted to throw up, scream, punch a wall. Anything to get rid of the suffocating anger and humiliation churning inside me. Instead, I just sat there, numb. I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after that. I barely ate. I barely slept. My phone buzzed constantly. Lisa had been texting and calling nonstop. Apologies, please, desperate attempts to explain herself. I ignored every single one. By the fourth day, she showed up at the house. I heard the knock at the door and knew instantly it was her. For a moment, I considered not answering, pretending I wasn't home. But then I realized I needed this. I needed to look her in the eye and hear whatever excuse she had so I could finally put this behind me. I opened the door, and there she stood, hair a mess, eyes red and swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Tom," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, just talk to me." I stepped aside, letting her in. Not because I forgave her, but because I wanted to see if she would actually admit to everything now that she had nowhere to hide. She sat on the couch, clutching her hands together, avoiding my gaze. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, waiting. "Say it," I finally said, my voice cold and firm. Lisa flinched, then nodded slowly. "I cheated," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had actually said the words. Not "I made a mistake." Not "I didn't mean to hurt you." Just "I cheated." I let out a slow, shaky breath. "Why?" She wiped at her eyes, taking a long moment before responding. "I don't know," she finally said. It wasn't about him. It was about me. About feeling wanted, feeling like I wasn't just a wife or an employee or invisible. I clenched my jaw, trying to control my anger. "Invisible? You were my whole world, Lisa. I never stopped loving you." She shook her head quickly. "I know. And that's why this is killing me. I was selfish, Tom. I was stupid. I let myself make excuses for something that should never have happened. I don't even know who I am anymore." I didn't know what I expected her to say, but somehow this was worse. There was no grand love story between her and Gary. No deep emotional connection. Just a series of bad decisions, lies, and betrayal for the sake of excitement. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "It doesn't matter why you did it. You did it. And now we're here." She looked up at me, eyes filled with desperation. "Can we fix this?" I laughed, actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity of the question was just too much. "Fix this? Lisa, I watched you sneak around a Walmart loading dock to hook up with a janitor. You can't undo that. You can't erase what you did." Tears streamed down her face. "I love you, Tom." I shook my head. "If you did, you wouldn't have done this." Silence settled between us, thick and suffocating. I knew this was the moment. The one where most people either forgive or walk away. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I sure as hell wasn't going to pretend like we could move past this. So I did the only thing I could. "We're done, Lisa." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. But I didn't feel bad for her. Not anymore. I walked to the door and held it open. "Please leave." She hesitated, looking at me like she wanted to say something. One final plea, one last excuse. But then she nodded, stood up, and walked out. I shut the door behind her, locking it. And for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt something other than anger or sadness. I felt free. After Lisa left, the silence in the house felt different. It wasn't suffocating anymore. It was freeing. No more waiting for explanations. No more wondering if I should have done something differently. The decision was made. We were done. But just because I had made my choice didn't mean the pain disappeared. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. No smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. No sound of Lisa humming to herself while getting ready. Just me, alone in the bed where we had spent 6 years together. I laid there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to wrap my head around what my life had become. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing the routine, the familiarity, the sense of normalcy I had taken for granted. I finally forced myself to get up. I needed to move. To do something. I started with small things, changing the sheets, tossing out the toothbrush she left behind, deleting her name from my phone favorites. It was almost mechanical, but every action felt like reclaiming a small piece of my life. Then came the harder part. The texts. Lisa had kept messaging me since she left. Long paragraphs filled with regret, apologies, and pleas for a second chance. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I had nothing left to say. I did, however, respond to one message. Her mom, Lisa's mother, Margaret, had always been kind to me. She had sent a simple message. "I'm so sorry for everything. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." I hesitated for a long time before replying. "Thank you. I appreciate it." She didn't push for details, didn't ask questions. She just let me know I wasn't alone, and honestly, that meant more than I expected. By the afternoon, I realized I needed to do something that I had been avoiding since the moment I found out. I needed to tell my family. My parents had always liked Lisa. To them, she was the perfect daughter-in-law, smart, kind, loving. Telling them that our marriage was over because she had been sneaking around with a Walmart janitor felt humiliating. But I couldn't avoid it forever. I called my dad first. He picked up after 2 rings. "Hey, Tom. Everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Not really, Dad. Lisa and I were over." The pause on the other end was long. "What happened?" "She cheated." Another silence. Then, finally, a quiet. "I'm sorry, son." I expected more questions, but he didn't pry. He didn't tell me to fix things. He just listened. For the first time since this nightmare started, I let myself talk. I told him everything. How I had noticed the signs, how I found out, how I had confronted her. I even told him about Gary. When I finished, my dad let out a long breath. "I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you'll get through this. One day it won't hurt as much." I wanted to believe him. I wasn't sure if I did. We hung up, and I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally. I knew there were still more things to deal with. Our finances, the legal side of things, moving on. But for now, I had done enough. For the first time since everything fell apart, I allowed myself a small win. I went to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee, and sat on the couch. Alone, but not broken. I was starting over. One step at a time. The next step was the one I had been dreading the most. Divorce. I had never thought about divorce before. Lisa and I had talked about growing old together, having kids, maybe moving to a quieter neighborhood someday. We had shared so many dreams, and now I was sitting in my living room, Googling divorce lawyers. The reality of it hit me like a truck. This wasn't just an emotional breakup. It was a legal process, a division of lives, assets, and everything in between. I had heard horror stories about how messy divorces could get, how bitter people became. I didn't want that. I just wanted out. After scrolling through pages of attorneys, I finally picked one with good reviews and set up a consultation. When I walked into his office, I felt like I had stepped into an entirely different world. The place smelled like old leather and coffee, and the lawyer, let's call him Mr. Carter, looked exactly like the kind of guy who had seen too many messy breakups. He shook my hand firmly and got straight to business. "What's the situation?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I took a deep breath. "My wife cheated. I want a divorce. I don't want drama. I just want this to be over." Carter nodded, flipping open a notepad. "Do you own any property together?" "No, we rent." "Shared bank accounts?" "We each have our own, but there's a joint one for bills." "Any children?" "No." Carter scratched something down and then looked up at me. "This should be relatively simple, then. If she agrees to an uncontested divorce, you could be done within a few months." That was exactly what I wanted. Quick, clean, done. But there was one problem. Lisa. Would she actually agree to an easy divorce? Or would she try to fight for something more? That night, I finally texted her for the first time since she left. "Me. We need to talk about the divorce. I want this to go smoothly." I stared at my phone, waiting for a response. My heart pounded as those 3 little dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Lisa, I don't want a divorce." I closed my eyes, frustration boiling inside me. Of course, she didn't want a divorce now. Now that she had lost everything, now that she realized what she had done, now she wanted to fight for us. But it was too late. "Me, Lisa, it's over. I already met with a lawyer. I need you to agree to this." Another long pause. Then finally, "Lisa, can we meet and talk? Please. Just once." I hesitated. Meeting her again meant reopening wounds that had barely started healing. But I also knew that if I wanted this divorce to move quickly, I needed to hear what she had to say. I sighed, running a hand down my face. "Me, fine. One last conversation." The next day, we met at a small diner halfway between where she was staying and our old apartment. She looked different, tired, almost fragile. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger toward her. Not love, just sadness. She stared at her coffee cup for a long time before speaking. "Tom, I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just need you to know. I regret everything." I nodded, staying quiet. "I don't know why I did it," she continued. "It wasn't about Gary, I swear. It was about me being selfish and stupid and ruining the best thing in my life. I clenched my jaw. And now that you've ruined it, you want to fix it? She winced. I just don't want to lose you completely. I exhaled sharply, leaning back in my seat. Lisa, you already did. She bit her lip, eyes welling with tears. If I agree to the divorce, will you ever talk to me again? I thought about it. About everything we had shared, the good times, the years we had spent together. And then I remembered the texts. The videos. The night I caught her sneaking around behind a dumpster at Walmart. No, I said simply. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. Okay. And just like that, it was done. The divorce papers were signed a few weeks later. Lisa moved out of state shortly after. I never asked where. I never cared. For the first time in 6 years, I was completely free. And honestly, it felt damn good. The divorce was finalized. The papers were signed. Lisa was gone. And yet, somehow, the hardest part had just begun. For 6 years, my life had been intertwined with hers. Every decision, every plan, every moment of my day had included her in some way. And now? Now, I woke up to an empty bed. I ate dinner alone. I had no one to share my thoughts with at the end of the night. I had wanted this. I had fought for this. But nobody tells you how hard it is to unlearn a person. The first week after the divorce, I threw myself into distractions. I went to the gym for the first time in months. I reorganized the apartment. I even tried going out with some friends, forcing myself to laugh at their jokes, to act normal. But at the end of the night, I always ended up back in my apartment, sitting in silence. Then came the dreams. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, thinking Lisa was still next to me. I'd reach out, half asleep, only to feel nothing but cold sheets. The worst part was that the dreams weren't nightmares. They weren't memories of her betrayal. They were just normal. Us cooking dinner together, watching TV, holding hands while walking through the grocery store. And then I'd wake up and remember everything. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. One night, after another restless evening, I grabbed my phone and opened a blank note. I typed one question at the top. Who am I without her? It was a question I didn't know how to answer. So I decided to find out. The next day, I booked a weekend trip to a city I had always wanted to visit but never had the time for. I went alone. At first, it felt weird. Sitting in restaurants by myself. Walking through museums with no one to talk to. But by the second day, something shifted. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped thinking about Lisa. For the first time in weeks, I felt present. I realized something important that weekend. I had spent so much of my marriage trying to be a good husband, trying to keep our life together, that I had completely forgotten about myself. Lisa had moved on a long time ago, long before she met Gary. I had just been too blind to see it. But now, I had the chance to start over, to rediscover who I was before her. And this time, I wasn't going to waste it. After my solo trip, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a dramatic, overnight transformation. I didn't suddenly wake up healed or free from the past. But I had taken the first step toward moving forward, and that was enough. I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I changed my routine. Waking up earlier, hitting the gym, cooking real meals instead of just ordering takeout. I started reading again, something I hadn't done much during my marriage because I was always too busy trying to make things work with Lisa. One day, while cleaning out the apartment, I found an old notebook filled with things I had once wanted to do. Hobbies I had abandoned. Goals I had forgotten. One thing stood out, learning to play the guitar. It had been a passing thought years ago, something I mentioned once but never followed through on. Lisa had even laughed at the idea, saying I was too impatient to learn an instrument. That night, I ordered a second-hand guitar online. I spent hours watching tutorials, fumbling through the chords, feeling ridiculous at first. My fingers hurt, and I sounded terrible, but it didn't matter. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Lisa. I wasn't thinking about Gary. I wasn't thinking about Walmart dumpsters or betrayal. I was thinking about me. One evening, while practicing, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Lisa's mom, Margaret. Margaret, hey, Tom. I know it's been a while, but I just wanted to check in. How are you doing? I hesitated. It had been weeks since I last spoke to her. She had been kind to me throughout the divorce, but part of me wondered if she was texting because Lisa had asked her to. I decided to be honest. I'm doing okay. Moving on. A minute later, another text popped up. Margaret, I'm glad to hear that. Just so you know, Lisa moved out of state. I think she's trying to start over too. I stared at the message for a long time. Lisa was gone. I hadn't seen her, hadn't heard from her. But something about knowing she was physically gone made everything feel more real. And surprisingly, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just relief. That night, I played my guitar a little longer. The chords still sounded rough, my fingers still ached, but I didn't stop. Because for the first time in forever, I wasn't just surviving. I was rebuilding. The days turned into weeks, and the heaviness that had once consumed me started to fade. The routine I had built, gym, reading, learning guitar, became more than just distractions. They became my life. I wasn't just filling time anymore. I was growing. One afternoon, I was at a coffee shop, something I had avoided doing alone for a long time. Lisa and I had always had our favorite spots, and stepping into one without her had felt like walking into a ghost town. But this time, it was different. I was different. I ordered my drink, found a seat by the window, and opened my book. I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't worrying about what came next. I was just there. And then, someone laughed. Not just any laugh. It was one of those genuine, full-body laughs, the kind that makes you want to turn your head just to see what's so funny. I glanced up and saw a woman sitting a few tables away, laughing at something on her phone. She had no idea I was watching, no idea that for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A real smile. Not forced. Not bitter. Just natural. She caught me looking, and instead of awkwardly looking away, she smiled back. And just like that, I realized something. Lisa had taken a lot from me, but not everything. I still had this moment. I still had the ability to feel something new, something different. I didn't walk over. I didn't try to start a conversation. I wasn't there yet. But I smiled back. And that was enough. That smile, that moment in the coffee shop, was the turning point I didn't know I needed. It wasn't about the woman at the table, or even the possibility of meeting someone new. It was about me. I had spent so much time thinking about what Lisa had taken from me, my trust, my sense of security, the life we had built together. But for the first time, I realized she hadn't taken everything. She hadn't taken my ability to be happy. She hadn't taken my future. And she sure as hell hadn't taken my story. I left the coffee shop that day feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about accepting it. What happened happened. It changed me, but it didn't define me. I kept moving forward. I focused on myself. Kept learning the guitar, kept hitting the gym, kept rediscovering who I was before her and who I wanted to be after her. And one day, without even realizing it, I stopped thinking about Lisa. Not in a forced way, not in a bitter way. I just moved on. Months later, I found myself back at that same coffee shop. Same table, same book. Only this time, I wasn't just existing, I was living. And when the woman from that day walked by, she smiled at me again. This time, I did start a conversation. Because I was finally ready. Ready to let go. Ready to live. Ready to write the next chapter of my life on my own terms.